So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming today. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is my first time at the Weston A. Price Foundation conference, and it has far exceeded my expectations. So I hope today you have fun with reframing the medical paradigm. What I'd like to do today is take concepts that the medical system, the scientific system, and the cultural system hold very dear as truths. And I'm going to work through some of those concepts and perhaps push the limits on what we understand those concepts to be and try to create new concepts. Because having graduated medical school in 1987 and been working in pediatrics since then, I have seen one lie build upon one lie, build upon one myth after another. And I can see that we definitely have a new paradigm awaiting us. And it just requires us to be willing to shift into what the new medicine needs to be. And so I'm going to talk about some of those foundational beliefs, and we'll take it from there. So the first myth, exposure to germs will make you sick. And so this is the core belief system of our culture and our science. And so when I work with families in the office, I say to them, how many bacteria are on the body? And they say, oh, many. Millions? Nope. Right? Billions? Nope. So there are over 100 trillion bacteria lining the body. And then I ask the parents, where are these bacteria? And deer in the headlights, like I'm testing them. Nose to lungs, mouth to anus, all over the skin, and in the women's reproductive system. And then my next question is, how do they get there? And one word, life. We breathe them in, we eat them, and they land on our skin. All right? Now, you have a mom who's pregnant, and we look at the baby inside, the fetus. We say, how many bacteria are lining the fetus? Very few. We used to think that there were none. We used to think the entire system was sterile. Over the last 10 years, we've come to understand that the amniotic fluid has bacterial particles and some bacteria that are from the mother's flora in the mouth and from the intestines, more than likely to prep the baby for entry into the world. And so essentially, the baby has very few, if any, bacteria, and then comes into the world. And only 2/3 of the time in this country will the baby come down the vaginal canal, unfortunately. But that baby will get a huge gulp of vaginal microorganisms, many bacteria, and nothing happens. And that baby will then have to live life to eventually have over 100 trillion bacteria lining nose to lungs, mouth to anus, skin, and if it's a girl, the female reproductive system. And nothing happens. So here we have a baby being born from almost a sterile environment, coming into the world, exposed to the process of developing over 100 trillion bacteria, and nothing happens. And yet, we're afraid of germs. Right? Exposure to germs, if it made you sick, that baby should die as soon as it reaches the vaginal canal. Because there's a huge gulp of vaginal microorganisms. So why don't we die when we're exposed to germs? Because they don't make us sick. So exposure is not sufficient. It's not enough to make you sick. If it were, the baby would die as soon as the baby's born. Because the baby doesn't have 100 trillion. We do. And even we don't die because we're constantly breathing in bacteria from the air. There's constant bacteria from the floor, from the earth, from the dirt that's being swept up by wind currents that we're swallowing and breathing in as well. And then when we touch surfaces, We're constantly being exposed. We walk around thinking we're not exposed to germs unless someone is sick to give it to us. Another faulty myth, right? The only way you're exposed to a germ that makes you sick is if someone who's sick gives it to you. Well, 100 trillion organisms are all over us, and more coming at any given time. Right? Which is why the 5-second rule should be maybe the 15-second rule when the food hits the ground, right? But what's more interesting to me is that what happens when we brush our teeth? The bacteria in our mouth go into our bloodstream. What happens when we digest our food? The bacteria mix with the food and they go into the bloodstream. And what happens when we wipe our behinds? The bacteria that are lining the anus go into the bloodstream and the lymph system. And what happens when we rub our skin? Bacteria that are in the skin will go inside. And what happens when we have sexual intercourse? Bacteria on the sex organs are going to go into the bloodstream. Nothing happens. So not only is exposure to germs on the nose to lungs, mouth to anus, and skin and reproductive systems not sufficient to make you sick, but then we're getting exposed to germs just by doing those practices I discussed. And yet we don't get sick. So we must start looking at this understanding that exposure to germs, not sufficient. Because exposure is happening all the time. We're never not exposed to microorganisms. And so this idea that the only way to be exposed to germs is if someone who's sick gives it to you needs to stop. Because we must start remembering and really incorporating the fact that germs are always around. We are never not exposed to germs. All right, let's move on. This is one of my favorite. There's a virus going around, or I caught a cold. I caught a virus. Now, when I teach this in the office, I say to parents, "What's a virus?" And they don't know. Most of us don't even know what a virus is. Some would even say a virus doesn't even exist, if you want to go that far. But let's go to what the science books really say before we go to the extreme of saying, well, they don't exist at all. When we look at a microscope, we can see bacteria swimming around. Can we see viruses swimming around under the microscope? Correct. No. All right. Can we ever see viruses in action? No. And that most people don't know. No one has ever witnessed the movement of a virus. We've imagined it, we've created the mythology, but you cannot see a virus move. How big is a virus? 1/1,000,000th of an inch long. What's the only picture that we say we can tell is a virus? Something called the electron microscope. But that's two-dimensional view. It's a black and white photo. And so what you'll hear is these virologists and experts say that that little round circle at the cell membrane is a virus going into the cell. How do they know it's going in? How do they know it's not coming out? See the mythology, right? No one has ever seen the movement of a virus, ever. So we're in trouble. Because we're constantly talking about, there's a virus going around. Oh, my kid has a virus. I caught a virus. And we don't know what we're talking about. So whereas a bacterium is a cell that can move, a virus is not a virus until it's a virus. What does that mean? So a virus starts out life as genetic information. It's genetic material RNA, DNA. That's it. So I'd like you to think of a virus before it's a virus as a word of letters before you put the letters in order. So it's just letters in an alphabet soup. No words, just letters. That's how a virus starts, just as genetic information. Now, something has to happen to that genetic information to arrange it, and then to allow it to be transcribed into what we call a virus. So many years ago, scientists did something called the Human Genome Project. And they were looking to see how many genes do we have as humans. And we found out that we have 20,000 genes in the body. That's it. 20,000 genes that make up the structure of our body. And that amounts to about 1.5% of all the genetic material in our cells, in our chromosomes. 1.5%, 20,000 genes. 120,000 genes were found to contain the genetic material that could make viruses. That's 9%. 1.5%, 20,000, physical body. 120,000 genes, genetic material to make viruses, 9% of the whole genome. That's 6 times. We have 6 times the amount of genetic material in the chromosomes than we have genes that make up our physical body. Now remember, the classic teaching is you don't have a virus until someone gives it to you, which is 1/millionth of an inch long, that no one has ever seen in action with any naked eye or microscope. You see the myths that we're trying to undo here. So another 34% of the genetic material in the body codes for virus-like particles. They're called retrotransposons. So that's 43% that we know of codes for has the genetic material that make viruses and virus-like particles. Now, that's inside the cell, in our nucleus, next to where the chromosomes are, where the genes are that make up our physical body. Now, we have over 100 trillion bacteria, right? Viral genetic material resides inside bacteria. It is estimated, not proven, estimated, that there are about 380 trillion viruses inside the bacteria that line our body. So we have over about 500,000 genes that we know of that code for viruses and virus-like material because they contain the genetic material inside the nucleus. We have about 380 trillion viruses embedded in the bacteria that are lining our body. And then we have something in the cells called mitochondria. Mitochondria, before they were mitochondria, were bacteria living in the environment. So there's a lot of genetic material inside mitochondria. And if there are bacteria inside mitochondria, there are going to be probably pieces of viral material inside the mitochondria. But you don't have the virus in your body until someone is sick and gives it to you. Now, you laugh uncomfortably, but this is the basis upon which we vaccinate. We vaccinate on the basis of you don't have the measles virus in your body. We're going to introduce it to you so that your body has a reaction to it, so that in the event you're exposed to someone who's sick, who then gives you the measles virus, you will be protected by having some antibody protection first. Every vaccine is based on the presumption that the organism against which you're being vaccinated is not yet in your body. Because the only way you could get that organism is if someone is sick and gives it to you. We're done. We're in trouble. Because we have over 100 trillion bacteria. We have probably more than 400 trillion viruses embedded inside the body and lining the body. And we're taught the only way for us to be exposed to a virus is if someone is sick and gives it to us. We're in trouble. We're in trouble because we're not looking at the body and how it works. You see, because those viruses of genetic material, those genetic materials of the viruses, they don't have any willpower of their own. They're actually only signaled to manufacture themselves by something in the environment. It's called an epigenetic force. And so someone could step back if you were sitting here going, wait a second, how many bacteria do we have? How many pieces of genetic material of viruses are in us and on us? Why are they there? And that should be the question. Why are they there? Because if germs are the enemy, we're sunk. And so if they're there, we have to understand what they're doing there. And so when we dig deep into the science of why these microorganisms are here, they're here to actually protect us. And how do they protect us? They stop things from coming in that shouldn't come in. The bacteria that are on our skin and in our intestines and in our airway are working really hard to keep poisons from getting inside the body. But the bacteria that are lining our body are also there to help us get rid of wastes. So they help us contract the colon and the rectum to allow for the stool to come out. They also, at the end of the day, give us our body odor because they're working to bring the wastes out through the skin. They're helping to digest our foods. They interact with the immune system. They signal the brain. They're in constant connection with our entire immune and neurological systems based on their antenna of the outside world. And then they're also there to help us get rid of waste. Well, the viral material that's inside the cells does the same thing. It regulates the transcription of genes. It keeps the cell homeostasis going. It gets rid of wastes that are inside the cell and moves them out in pockets, out through the cell membrane, into the blood and into the lymph. And in fact, for women who get pregnant, viruses help manufacture the placenta. And yet, you don't have a virus unless somebody gives it to you. And we don't have any viruses in our body because they don't come unless somebody gives it to you. We're in trouble. Plus, if we have 400 trillion viral materials inside our body and on our body, they can't be that deadly, can they? So I remember going to medical school in the 1980s, and the pediatricians who were training us in the 80s had been in practice in New York since the 40s. And they taught us something unbelievably brilliant. They said that in their practices, when the kids in their practice had their measles, their mumps, their chicken pox, their flus, their rubella, the kids would then have developmental growth spurts after the illness was over. And I thought, okay, now fast forward to when I realized the degree to which viruses are in our body and the function of these viruses in our body. Well, those viral illnesses make sense. Because if the genetic material in the body cells that make viruses are being signaled to make viruses to help keep the cells healthy, well, then you can imagine what happens when the cells have increased wastes and impurities in them. It's going to send a signal inside the nucleus of the cell to get the cells to manufacture more virus. And by manufacturing more virus, the cells can then get rid of those wastes. And then all of a sudden, you have a viral illness. Because the wastes have reached a pinnacle that the cells can't tolerate and can't keep up. And so a viral illness is actually not a viral illness. It's the completion of dis-ease that the body needs in order to maintain life and not die. So actually, the viruses that are inside the cells are not the cause of the problem. They're the solution. They're actually helping the body to move the material that's built up in the cells, impurities, toxins, wastes, inflammation, that must get out. So it's really important to remember that a viral illness is not something you catch, maybe. It's something that's triggered from inside your body that needs to clean you out and get you better. There's never not a virus going around. Never not. You cannot avoid viruses. And in fact, if we're breathing in bacteria all the time, are we breathing in viruses all the time? Nothing happens. Because in order for that virus to hurt you, it has to get inside your cell. That genetic material must get inside your genes. And something must trigger the replication of that genetic material so that it makes more viruses. But that doesn't guarantee that you'll get sick. Because we're exposed to viruses all the time. And you see, viruses have no life of their own. They have no messenger of their own. They have to have a cell, a host, a plant, a bacteria, a human, an animal, in order for them to replicate. So that viral material, even if you're exposed to it, it has to go through many steps to get through your cells, into the genes, and then something has to turn it on to make enough of it for you to have symptoms that bring the material out to the surface. And so when I teach this, people say to me, well, then how do epidemics start? Right? How is there a measles outbreak? Or how is there a chickenpox outbreak? Well, my question to that is, well, how does the first case of measles occur? Right? If it's a contagious disease, how does the first case occur? It's got to start with case 1. Nobody thinks about that. Right? Case 1 has to start. Right. So, if we look at us as an energy system, and we look at the microorganisms as an energy system, and we look at the microorganisms interacting with us in an energetic way, and us with them in an energetic way, and them with each other in an energetic way, we're subjected to the outside energies. Well, so are the microorganisms in our body. And when we're subjected to the energies of each other, the microorganisms of our body are subjected to the energies of each other. And so when women live in a dorm or work in an office or live in a house together, after a couple of months, we know what happens, right? Many of them, not all, start menstruating at the same time. So did the women catch their periods from each other? You laugh, but the answer is yes. But not in the way we consider contagion. And that's why I preempted it with, we're in an energetic field. Microorganisms are subjected to an energetic field too. We're subjected to energetic fields between us. And so what happens is there isn't some period that flies out of a woman's body that some other women catch to menstruate at the same time. Funny, right? But there is a bioenergetic synchronization between the women, but not all the women. And there are enough people in the room to remember chickenpox parties. And not everybody in the room got chickenpox. And so if we're going to talk about contagiousness, we have to remember that it's very possible that the organism was already inside the body because of how many we already have, how many we're exposed to. And this idea that the only way to get an organism in your body is for someone else to give it to you is weak. It's very weak. And so what is contagious may not be an organism. It may be a rhythm, it may be a synchronization, it may be a bioenergetic field, or it may be something else that we have yet to really discover.